Listeners, we're going to get to the intros, but first, before that, I'm talking with Doug Owen. And Doug, I want you to tell us something about the office asset class that you believe that might surprise us.
I think the surprising fact is that the office asset class is not dead. People are not working from home as much as everybody thinks. They are in the office, and there's actually a desire to be in the office.
Listeners, we've heard it before and we are hearing it again. That office is not dead. Today, I am talking with Doug Owen of JLL, and you are listening to the Source of Commercial Real Estate, where we talk to the experts in non residential commercial real estate so you can find a competitive advantage, use real estate to live the life that you want. I am your host, Jonathan Hayek. I'm a former public school teacher. I found financial freedom through residential real estate investing, and now I invest in commercial properties, particularly small industrial properties. I'm talking with Doug Owen today, and he is Senior Vice President with JLL, based in the Louisville office. With more than 20 years in the commercial real estate industry, Doug specializes in the leasing and sales of office properties and office tenant representation. Doug started with Harry K. Moore Co. in 1999 as an office broker. From 2003 to 2016, he served as a co-owner of the company until its acquisition by JLL in May 2016. Doug has earned numerous Broker of the Year awards and also received the SIOR designation in 2004. Doug, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to talk about the office asset class and how it is not dead. Thanks for being here. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. And I'm glad that somebody is excited to talk about office, which is something I love to talk about.
Great. Well, I just talked a little bit about your background, but I'd love for you to tell us a little more about your background, how you got started in real estate, and what your work looks like today.
Sure. Well, I think the interesting thing is I actually started in public relations up in Washington, D.C., and I'm from Louisville. We made a circular journey, or a curve journey, ended up back in Louisville in the late 90s, and actually met the owner of this company now, who's since passed on. And he asked me, he said, what are you up to? Do you have a job? Do you have a salary? Do you have benefits? And I said, yes. And he said, you're a wimp. You need to come over and try this. And so I went home and I told my wife, we had a 3-month-old son, that I was going to give up salary in change for commission. And after she picked her jaw up off the floor, wiped her tears, this started a journey. And you're correct. I was an owner of the company for a while after our previous owner passed away in the early 2000s. We sold to JLL in 2016. It's been a fantastic experience. It's been up and downs. I think 2008, 2009, I maybe went 2 years without seeing any of my competitors. The market was so slow, but it's been a great journey, and I've been really fortunate to work with the people here and with the JLL team.
So, Doug, I talked with your colleague. I don't know if you know her, Michelle Klingenberg. She works with JLL out of the Cincinnati office, and she had a really similar line to you. She's like, office is not dead, but you've got to pick your spots. So I'd love for you to give us sort of a 30,000-foot view of what you are experiencing in the office asset class in the Louisville area right now.
Sure. So it is, and I tell a lot of my clients this, we are right now looking at a tale of two cities. And that is the difference between our downtown market and our suburban market. And in my nearly 25 years, I've never seen anything like this. And I do think this is going to be the future. And what we're seeing is we are not seeing any new development in Louisville, any new spec build for the office sector, which means our suburban product is very tight. Our downtown is a different market. There is a lot of vacancy. And the lot is not because we've had tenants move out of downtown. We haven't. We haven't had employees reduce headcounts at all. In fact, I think a lot of employers are increasing headcounts. What happened over a few years, about a year or so before COVID, was Humana Healthcare, which is our one of our headquartered in Louisville, had over, I don't know, over 750,000 square feet of office space in downtown Louisville. And they hired a new director of real estate who said, hey, we own several million square feet of office space that we're not doing anything with. And I think it would be in our best interest and the shareholders' best interest if we redid all that space, made it more efficient, and got out of all of our leases. And so going into COVID, we were taking this very slow pause of Humana giving back space throughout the downtown market, and it was having an impact. Unfortunately, we had a 2 year of nothing during COVID to kind of rebound. And so that really was kind of what upset the whole pot in our downtown and caused the current situation we're in. Uh, what we are seeing is that owners of our downtown towers now, a select group of owners, are making substantial investments in their towers. So behind the walls, HVAC, elevators, and so forth, but also the public spaces. So they're adding amenities, they're upgrading their lobbies, they're changing security procedures, and any host of things. They're adding coffee shops. And so what's happened now is you've got groups that are saying, okay, I'm not really sure how my office is going to operate, but I do want more people back in the office, and that's the best way for us to do it. So there's been a consolidation of companies moving out of maybe the B space to higher end A space. And so they're taking less space, but they're taking better space, and they're willing to pay a little bit more rent. So that's been the biggest move in our downtown market. I think our suburban market has stayed pretty steady. It has it stayed solid because it takes about 24 to 36 months to go from start to finish. And there's nothing in the current pipeline. I don't expect to see anything spec built in our suburban market for the next 2 to 3 years, which means we're going to stay status quo. It is a landlord's market in the suburbs and a tenant's market in downtown.
That is some really interesting and valuable information. And that's just a testament to, I think, just how embedded in the market you are and how valuable it is to work with someone like yourself that is so knowledgeable in your market. I'm interested in this downtown versus suburban uh, juxtaposition. So, do you do deals only in downtown, or do you also work in the suburbs?
No, I do both. And in Louisville, we put our landlord representation hat on in the morning and our tenant representation hat on in the afternoon. So we work both sides of the transactions, but it is very different. And one thing of note is there is no flight either from downtown to the suburban market. So the tenants that have been suburban tenants are very much suburban tenants and have stayed. Now, what we are seeing is groups moving from the suburbs into downtown. And there's any number of reasons. And we've had Forvis, which is an lead accounting firm, just moved about 20,000 feet to the top of one of the downtown towers. We're working with a financing group right now to move into one of the towers. Old National Bank, which is a regional bank, just moved from kind of the outskirts of downtown into the core of downtown. We're seeing a lot of that, and the reasons are varied from tenant to tenant, as you might imagine. Some are saying, "Hey, I want to take advantage of the lower rates in downtown, the higher quality space. This I want to make a real move." Others are saying, my younger employees would rather be in an urban environment, and that's where I want to be. Others are saying, look, to attract new employees, to retain existing employees, I need to be in top of market properties that have the most amenities. And that's what our downtown towers have. They are the most amenitized of any buildings. And so I think it's a very interesting move. And we are seeing, like I said, several companies taking advantage of that and moving in, taking advantage of the low rates and the vacancy. The other is Louisville has started an incentive program with the total pots about 3 million, and each new to downtown tenant. And for your national listeners, that's new to Louisville tenants into downtown. They get $30 a square foot to do pretty much whatever they want to within their space. And so that has been a good incentive. I can't name any names, but I'm working with two tenants above the 10,000 mark that are both going to use those incentives. Those incentives got them to look at downtown when they probably wouldn't have before. And they realize that it's not what everybody says it is, and it's a really great environment, and they've taken advantage of that. So that's been an asset to help us fill up some of our buildings.
Do you know offhand the vacancy rates downtown versus the suburbs?
I do, and it's a little. I talk to lenders about this, right? Because everybody wants to know the vacancy rate, and so in our vacancy rate in downtown is I think roughly 20%. Our suburban vacancy rate is roughly 15%. So not a huge difference, and one step further is our vacancy rate is, even given that's higher than we like to see, is lower than most of our regional cities. You mentioned Cincinnati earlier, it is lower. But I think you really have to drill down in today's environment where you didn't have to pre-COVID, and drill down into the individual buildings. And so some people are operating their buildings very very well. They've got a good cash basis behind them, and they're very stable. And those buildings have good occupancy. There's other buildings that have not performed well and are not operating the way they should. The ownerships are in trouble. There's distressed assets. So those vacancies are very low. Now, 5 years ago, we would have said, okay, somebody's going to buy these and they'll fluctuate and it'll change. So the overall vacancy rate is fine. Almost That's almost across the board incorrect today. And so a lot of companies, including JLL, have moved from saying we're just going to have class A, B, and C space to say we're going to have class A, B, and C and trophy asset class. And the trophy asset class is kind of that top of market A building. And you see that mostly in the downtown sectors where you have towers. But what that's allowing us to do is to segregate out those towers that are the owners are making investments, that are seeing a lot of activity and are doing well and are very good quality, away from those distressed assets, which technically are A, but are slipping into that B market because there is no money to upgrade them. So I think that's a big change for our market.
Let's talk about some of these properties that are attracting tenants and are attracting the high rents. I've heard in other markets that these, what you call trophy asset class, I've heard other brokers call it A++, or there's all kinds of different branding for it. But some of those spaces are attracting great tenants, record rents, and really high occupancy. So, can you talk about some of those downtown trophy properties where the landlord is investing capital into the properties? What sort of amenities or locations or whatever is attracting tenants to those trophy properties and getting them to pay those record high rents?
So one, outdoor spaces are ruling the day, and that's something personal to me. I've always enjoyed the outdoor, and I think that's really come from COVID. But that is where I've told my clients where they know they have to invest is create some sort of outdoor space. It doesn't have to be an acre. It just needs to be a space where tenants can go and enjoy the outdoors for a little while. So in Louisville, we have four what I would call trophy assets. So we have PNC Tower, we have 400 West Market, we have 500 West Jefferson, and 401 South Fourth. And 400 West Market and PNC Tower are kind of their stable assets. They made the investments in their properties, their major investments pre-COVID, and so they've made some adjustments post COVID just to kind of keep up, but they're cash heavy, they're good. 500 West Jefferson just completed I've heard numbers between 15 and $18 million renovation, and 401 South Fourth is about to start. They just announced that 2 weeks ago. They're about to start a 10 to $15 million renovation. And so renovation, what does that mean? So does that mean we're putting a new roof on, we're putting new windows in? Not necessarily. That's back of the house stuff. What I'm telling my clients to do, my owner clients to do, is chase occupancy. And so to chase occupancy, you have to worry less about rent, and you have to be willing to spend money to get tenants in. The status quo does not work anymore, and you're in a competitive environment. I tell my clients every lease over 5,000 feet in downtown Louisville is going to be a knife fight, and we got to get in it, and you got to present the best way forward. So, what amenities are people putting in? And we're trying to put in amenities that tenants want, that they want for their employees, that they think is going to help those employees come back to the office, that they also think is going to help them attract new employees. And so we look at it from an attraction and a retention view of putting these amenities in. And so it becomes important. And never before in my career has a partnership between building owner and tenant been more important than it is today. And so that's you are if you are a building owner and you do not consider yourself a 100% partner with your tenants, you're in trouble. But let's get back to the amenities that matter. So we're seeing outdoor spaces, and I think 500 West Jefferson in Louisville did a really interesting thing. They had kind of an annex, which used to be a bank branch, over as part of their building. So they built out, they redid their lobby, they changed that, but then they went up and they did their amenity floor on the fourth floor. So they have a great, they've done a huge workout area. They've got a great lounge area. Each tenant has a bourbon locker where they can put some, bourbon's the story of the day in Louisville, Kentucky. And then, of course, the typical conference rooms, like you've got to have the big meeting room. But now the trend is you've got to have that big meeting room, but you also have to have boardrooms. So we've got, they've put in 8-man boardrooms, a 10-man boardroom, so that tenants can take that space out of their rentable space and let the landlord pay for it. Then what they did, which is I think fabulous, which is off this fourth floor tenant lounge area, they created a little section on the rooftop of this annex section for an outdoor area. And they furnished it really nicely. Part of it's shaded, part of it's not. It's all Wi-Fi accessible. You're up off the street. You're 40 or so feet in the air, and it's just fantastic. It's got a great view of the river, and so that is what needs to happen. PNC Tower and 400 West Market both have really great street plazas. And so they are now spending money to renovate those plazas, to have different furniture in those plazas and different ways to access them. PNC just redid their tenant lounge to take it from just a seating area to more of it's still got seating, but it's got work areas, it's got meeting area, it's got some booths, it's got all sorts of stuff. So, the idea, and I heard it from Brown-Forman, which is headquartered here, and they make Jack Daniels, Woodford Reserve, their CEO, I think his mindset was everybody needs to be back in the office. And somebody said, okay, we have to have a softer approach. And maybe it's not back in the office, but it's back on campus. And so they have spent money renovating their campus area, which is fairly large. And I believe I understand it is that you can come to the campus and work there, but you don't necessarily ever have to go to your office, but maybe you have to be on campus 3 days a week. And so we've tried to emulate that idea for our tenants. So you can come, your office may be in the tower or in the building, but we've created other workspaces for you. We've got coffee shops, we've got lounge areas, we've got work areas, we've got outdoor areas. So that, if you live in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, or maybe you're sick of your kids and your dog or your husband or your wife, you can come in. You don't have to be in a cube all day. There's other places to go. And so that's where we're seeing it trending. I would say in some of the bigger cities where the higher rents, you're seeing, even a higher step in terms of the quality of what's put forward. So I think that is for me, loving outdoors, that's a great trend.
Yeah, that is so interesting about landlords being so responsive to tenants and tenant requests. Um, does this stuff seem to be working? Are tenants responding to all these renovations and the seating areas? And are employees coming back to the office? And is this working?
It is, and I'd love to say that it's just magically getting employees to come back to the office, but there are mandates, and they are. But again, back to that partnership. If our biggest tenant is going to mandate employees come back to the office, we have to look 4 steps ahead and say, okay, what happens in 3 or 4 years? And if all the employees are complaining, then the easiest solution for that tenant is just to move to a different building and try something different. Um, Look, let's be real. We are not, we're not charging top of the market, top of the country rents. We are still very aggressive in rents, and in free rent, and so there's a lot of incentive to 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 encourage tenants to come into these spaces and take them. But I've had conversations with tenants, with employees in these areas. They'll grumble about having to be in the office, the same as most everybody. But they seem to be happy in these spaces, and so the more that you can offer them, the better. I mean, we have a coffee shop in one of our towers. We have a kind of a cafeteria in the lower level of another. People seem to gather around that stuff. So they might complain about the quality of the food or the taste of the coffee, but it's always full. I mean, somebody's always in there. So those have been great things to bring people in.
Doug, I'd love to learn about some of the incentive programs and concessions that tenants are receiving. So imagine you're having a conversation with a tenant that's, let's say, moving from the suburbs back downtown. They're saying, oh, our employees want to be downtown, and we're looking for 10,000 square feet downtown. You alluded to the Louisville incentive program of $30 a foot. I would love to know more about that and where that money comes from and how that's delivered to tenants. I would also really like to know about lease structures and what sorts of concessions tenants are expecting to receive from landlords in order to move downtown.
All right. Well, let me take the first part and talk about the city's incentives. And so, uh, first off, it's a $3 million total pool. I don't tend to ask questions when the government offers me money, so I'm not really sure where it's coming from. But they've got it in their budget. I will add that they have also they're seeking, I believe, 30 to 100 million from the state legislator to encourage downtown residential development. So that's a whole nother podcast. But I think we have a mayor now that we haven't had. We had a new mayor elected last January that gets it and knows that he knows it's the long game, and so he's been instrumental, I think, in really helping. He's standing, if the building owners are standing side by side with our tenants, he's standing side by side with the building owners, which is a partnership in and of itself, which is great. So they've come up with this $3 million pot. They've decided it's up to 30 million, excuse me, $30 a square foot. I'm not sure how they figure out how they allocate that, but it is tied to tenant improvements. You can, I believe, use it for, it's pretty much anything if you were to turn the building upside down that doesn't come out. So improvements, I don't think you can use it for furniture, but if there's areas in the building that you said, hey, I want to improve, you could certainly give that to the building. What I think what most are doing is saying, okay, this is what, and I'm going to tie this kind of into the tenants, to the landlord side, is that the landlord's giving us X amount of money. That builds our space great. But you know what? We want to take that next step, which we've never wanted to do before. And now we're going to add, different pieces and places within our space to really make it a better space. Whereas before, we didn't want to use that $300,000 of our own funds on a 10,000 square foot lease to do it. So that's what we're seeing. And we've seen that with some tenants, and that's been great. Now onto the landlord incentives, and again, these are all over the board. The ones that matter are tenant improvement allowances. I mean, that's the start and end of most discussions. And so the buildings that have been the most successful are the ones that are coming up with the highest tenant improvement allowance. And again, that math may not always work. And I have done deals where the building owner does not cash flow positively until year 8 or sometimes 9. And again, that's chasing occupancy. So you have to put a little trust in Doug Owen to say, we think that tenant's going to renew. And hopefully I don't retire before the tenant renews so they can still beat me over the head with a Louisville slugger if they need to. But it's, that idea that it's more important to chase occupancy than rents at this time. And, accepting the fact that we are having to buy leases via TI. And when you can get to that point, those are the ones that are winning, that have to come out of the pocket the least. The other is the free rent, and Louisville has never really been a historical free rent within the lease term. It's always been in addition to the term, and that's fine. And tenants accept that, and that's good because they can offset that initial 6 months or 3 months or whatever it is of the free rent period where they're not paying anything to pay for their moving costs or pay for their furniture. But in these days, we've got some landlords that understand the long game and are saying, okay, I know that there's not a lot of leases turning in the next 6 to 12 months, so I'm going to look out 36 months. And if you find a tenant that is interested, that has 12 months, 24 months, maybe more, I'm willing to talk to that tenant as long as they're big enough and their term is long enough, about an extensive free rent period to offset. So if you've got a group that expires in 28, maybe we start their lease in 25 and they can move in the building and they don't pay until 28 when their current lease expires. And so that's a harder cookie to bite on for some of these guys. That that's 3 years where they're not going to get any rent, and they still have to pay their bills. They still have to pay their operating expenses, which run, somewhere between 8.5, 9 in the suburbs to 10.5, 11.5 in downtown. So they still have to pay all that, but that's the long game. And that's what the landlords that are successful are looking at the long game and not the short game. And so that's, not every building owner is willing to do 2 to 3 years of free rent, but some are. And that's, when you propose that to a tenant and say you don't have to pay rent for 3 years, they give you a really strange look sometimes, whether or not they actually believe you or not.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. And it sounds like, man, there could be some landlords in a really difficult position. And I think you summarized it really well, that it's really a lesson for all real estate investors that you've got to have a long-term outlook. And it sounds like there's been some pain, and the landlords, many of the landlords are starting to understand that if they want to put a stop to the pain, they've got to provide some concessions. I want to ask you about the TI allowances. When a tenant walks into a space and they say, yeah, it's a good location, it's a good amount of square footage, what sort of things are they envisioning that they want to do with their TI allowances? Is this paint and carpet kind of stuff? Are they asking for walls to get knocked down? What sort of things are they looking for?
No, we're typically, and I think a gut and redo is maybe the wrong word, but I would say a gut and redo is 40% of the time where we just take everything out, go back to the studs or to the drywall, and then rebuild exactly for the tenant. The other is we might try to preserve a few walls here and there, but much to my owner's dismay, a lot of times I say, look, to the tenants, let's not try to put a round hole in the square peg. In other words, if you're going to sign a 5 or 10-year lease, you need to plan on being here double that amount of time, because the in Louisville, the majority percentage of tenants renew. And you can say, okay, I'll have an improvement allowance at that mark time to refresh my space. But the reality is that's a huge disturbance to have somebody come in and replace your carpet or paint while you're trying to operate in the space. So they hardly ever do it. So, the idea is find a space and design it so it really works for you. And so we employ space planners for our tenants that we let them, help them plan, design for free. JLL also has a 3D modeling program. So when we get that space plan, we can put it into that, and then the tenants can do a 3D walkthrough. But for the most part, they are gutting and taking spaces back out and building what we need. Now, what are they building? I think one of the most interesting things that has happened post COVID is where the break room, if you will, goes. And historically, that break room was always on the inside of the space. And, tucked back in a corner, you could maybe get a 4-man table in there, and there was some, gray Formica with a 1970s refrigerator and sink and, the worst lighting possible. All right. So that was the employee break room, and that would serve a 20,000 square foot tenant. So post COVID, and I think that in Louisville, the two biggest tenants that I've seen this with are Forvis and PNC Tower and Stoll Keenan Ogden Law Firm in 400 West Market, is they took the north view, which that's our signature view in Louisville. It faces the river. It's great. We have a huge fireworks right before Derby starts, so you can have parties and watch it. So those are I'm the senior partner. That's where my office goes. I'm head of the office. That's where my office goes. What these firms have done is taken that space, that north view, and created it's a gathering space. So it's a community room, if you will. So it's a kitchen on steroids. And what they've done is that it's huge tables. It's a big center table. They've got, a bourbon bar set up. They've got your typical kitchen stuff. They've got seating. They've got lounge area. So it's your getaway space. And, and then on top of that, you've got this huge north view. So where these spaces used to be 200 or 300 square feet, they're now sometimes 1,000 to 2,500 square feet. And so that is, and let me double back. To make this work in smaller space, these firms have said, okay, the partner offices that used to be 10,000 square feet, could fit a whole house in there. We're all going to go to uniform partner offices. We're not going to have corner offices anymore. We're going to, take a smaller space, and we're going to have more community spaces throughout our office. And that's going to be to the benefit of everybody. And that kind of like leveling of the playing field, if you will, I think that is what we're talking about when we're saying let's create spaces for the long term for our employees so that we can get employees to come back to the office, attract new ones, and most importantly, retain our existing. And that's really the key, is retention right now. But that's where they're spending. And so we're seeing a huge spend in these kind of public offices and much less in the CEO office. So the CEO kind of gets what everybody else gets. And then they're making these big spends in these public spaces. So that's where if you will, to circle back to your question, that's where the TI allowance is going to and should go to.
Yeah, and I think the pattern for me, as I'm talking with you and I've talked with other office brokers, the pattern is you have to make the office space a place that employees want to go to, because the employees now have some leverage. Whereas 15 or 20 years, there was no other option. If you want to go into the break room, there's a break room the size of a closet that looks like it hasn't been touched in the last 20 years with terrible fluorescent lighting. That's just the break room. But now employees have options. And so it really seems like employers and landlords are having to create a space that employees want to spend time in. So, Doug, where I'd like to go from here is your advisement with landlords and office building owners. Let's say they've got vacant space and they would, of course, love to lease it. What makes a great spec office space right now? What does it have to look or feel like, if anything, in order to get it as marketable as possible to a prospective tenant?
Yeah, I try to equate it. So I'm in my mid 50s. So when I started my career, you wore a suit and tie every day, and you don't do that anymore. But you know, I would always wear a suit downtown or just in town. And the idea was that you don't want to give somebody a reason to object to you. So if everybody's wearing a blazer or a suit, you should have one on and you fit in. And that that is kind of carried through to some of the advice I give the owners is that you have you have a 20-minute showing. You have one chance to see this tenant, and you've got to put your best foot forward. And this tenant is not just looking at your building, this prospect, excuse me. They're looking at five, and at the end of the day, they're all going to blur. So what do we do? And as much as owners and they resist till you're pulling teeth out of them, is to white box the vacant spaces. Again, I've been in the business since 1999. I have never in that time seen, and I've leased millions of square feet. In that time, I have never seen one tenant walk in and say, "Hey, this is perfect. I'm going to take this space just the way it is." But landlords still believe that somebody's going to be able to reuse that space. They want to preserve it. They don't want to have to spend the money to put walls back up. They think they can reuse those walls. And I've heard it, time and time again. And I've been lucky to have some great clients that have agreed with me and have gutted spaces. And we may not always lease those gutted spaces, but it helps us lease other space in the building. So in other words, you don't have to gut every. If you have 700,000 square feet, and of that 100,000 is vacant, you don't need to gut 100,000, but you take a floor or two of representative spaces and you gut those out. If you're in a smaller suburban building, then yeah, you probably should gut the vacant spaces. I can't tell me how spaces I've walked into that are like royal blue with shag car. I mean, that just gives people the ick factor, and they walk in and out and they just write the whole thing off. And that's, as we're going through representing tenants and taking people through the building, through a list of buildings and trying to whittle that down to the top two. If a tenant says that space was gross, that's so easy to cross that building off. It might have been the perfect building, but the space didn't show well. And that's hard to do. And sometimes maybe you're like, okay, Mr. Owner, let me take you with you on the showing. We won't tell anybody who you are, and you can listen firsthand to see how people react. But so what we try to do is create at least a full floor, so tenants can get the idea of what a full floor looks like. Then you want to take a section. Some will create little mock offices to see how it might lay out. We do 3D renderings on electronic boards, so you can see how the space might look if you're an open plan or a closed plan. Closed plan, I'm meaning all offices, traditional law firm type stuff. And then we put in new ceilings and new lightings, and we redo the elevator lobby, and just so you can walk in. And the key is bright and open, shades up, lights on, has to look clean. And then there's small details. And so when you've got a space, that connection from wall to floor is really rough looking. And so owners we'll have them run a little bit of vinyl cove base around that. And that just gives a little bit of a finished look. And what you're trying to do is just remove objections. So you want stuff to not be noticed. And I've had tenants focus on the most mundane thing and rule buildings out because they can't get past the light fixture that was hanging halfway out of the ceiling. And, you can try as you might, like, look, this is, it's space, it's going to be changed. They'll build it. They're good. Some of them just can't get past it. So you've got to remove objections. And then the second step is show what it can become. But the removing of objections is the biggest. And owners that do this, that white box their space, lease their spaces in their building umpteen times faster than people that don't. It happens every time. And, you can say it till you're blue in the face, but that is the one key. And that's, if you want to be successful, that's it.
Doug, this has been such an enlightening conversation. You are clearly an expert in your field, and you know the asset class inside and out. So I just love getting this insight from you. As we wrap up this conversation, I'd love to get any further insight you have about the future moving forward. We've talked a lot about the evolution of office buildings in downtown areas. Looking towards the future, do you have any thoughts on where the office building asset class is headed? What tenants are going to be wanting? What landlords are going to need to be doing moving further into the future? Any thoughts on the future of the office asset class?
Yeah, so I mean, we've talked a lot about what's going to happen, with amenities, and landlords need to do that. And I know it sounds cliche, but I do believe that in the future there is going to be a place for the office sector. Try as many in younger generations want. Work from home does not work for everybody. It doesn't work for every company. It works really well for some types of businesses, and that's probably something that was overdue, is to move some types kind of call center, like incoming call center stuff, out to the home. Like, that's working really well. Employee morale is really up. But in general, most companies have that team building. They need to be in the office. I was having lunch with an attorney about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was asking him about it. And he gave me a great quote, which I'll never forget. He said, "If you want to be a lawyer for your job, you can work remote. If you just want to grind it out and be a lawyer, you can work from. If you want to really learn your specialty and grow your career and become a partner, an equity partner, you got to be in the office." And I've just never heard anybody say it as well as that, but that really defines the two. So, looking forward into the future, I mean, we've talked a lot about what landlords have to do, and there's a lot of spend on their side. What tenants are going to have to do is start accepting a higher rental rate. And these low rental rates are great. They're going to get us through this period. They're going to get occupancy up. But if you as a tenant say, "Hey, I really want X, Y, and Z in my building," um, we're going to see a consolidation around fewer products that are higher end. Tenants are going to have to accept that higher rental rate. And I'm not saying $10 a foot moving up, $1 or $2 incremental, but they have to be okay with that. It's a fair trade off, I think. Landlords still have a business, they're still providing a service, and they need to pay their debt. Lenders are also getting very picky. So, if you want your building to operate well, you need your landlord to be able to have a good lender by his side. And to do that, lenders need to see growth in rent. And so I always try to pit the lenders as the bad guy, against my tenants, so I don't have to make
Mhm.
my landlord the bad guy. Sorry to your lenders out there. Um, the, but that's what you're gonna. I think we're gonna see overall more consolidation toward the A sector, toward the trophy class. And so if you own a building, you're not upgrading, you're not making improvements. If you're full, maybe you're fine. But if you're not, you're probably going to have some trouble. And so that's that B class building, maybe with the windowed, HVAC units. That's on its way out, and so that needs to change. The other, I think, is going to be really interesting as we move forward is the conversions. In Louisville, our rental rates don't match the cost of construction to convert an office building to residential. But if you talk to our CVB head, Convention and Visitors Bureau, we need about 3,000 more rooms. So I do think it's very easy to prove out to a lender the cost to convert a couple of these buildings to hotels. And Bourbon, we've joked about it, but it is a real tourism grow in Louisville, Kentucky, and people come here and they stay here and then they go out into the state. But it's here to stay, and it's I don't know what percentage, but there's a huge percentage of tourists that just come in to taste bourbon. So there is a big demand for these hotel rooms, and they can fill it up. So I don't know that all the towers that are distressed would be conversion, but I think that's what we'll see first. And then lastly, on the local sector, I'm real excited to see what the mayor gets done with monies that he's able to gather from the state house to help landlords convert either vacant lots or older buildings and create a more of a residential area in our downtown. We have just an offshoot of downtown called Nulu, Nulu, New Louisville, that started maybe 15 years ago with the renovation of one building, which is now, the hottest spot in town. My kids are in their mid-20s, and when they come home, that's where they go, and that's where residential is growing. So we just need to kind of mimic that, and we've got some developers that are already ready to go. They just need some, financial help, some incentives, and then I think they can do that into our downtown. So in the future, 10 years, I see a real transformative city overall.
Doug, this has been such a valuable and insightful conversation. I am grateful that you shared your time and expertise with us today. If listeners want to connect with you or learn more about you, where would you like to send people?
Sure. My email address is doug.owen, Owen, at jll.com.
Doug, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, please reach out to either one of us. We clearly love talking about commercial real estate, and we would love to connect with you. Thank you so much for listening. We appreciate you. Until next time, take care.